Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service. Hello and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers and professional wrestling personalities about their lives in and outside of the ring, as well as doing acts of charity, community service, volunteering, and spreading positivity. You know, we're always about the positive vibes here on the podcast. And I've got a very special guest with me today. If you're a fan of the Memphis wrestling era or Nashville wrestling era, just Tennessee wrestling in general, I've got a very special guest with me. He is the grandson of the late Len Rossi. Len Rossi, you may have heard that name before. He wrestled all across the South, all across the United States. I'm talking about Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, Mississippi, even wrestled in New York. I mean, this guy was everywhere. And with me today, I've got his grandson here. He is a musician and fellow podcaster, Michael Rossi. Michael, welcome to Wrestling with Heart.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm super excited to be on the show and, share some stories about the infamous Len Rossi. So I'm excited about this.
Yes, it's my pleasure. And let's just start off with you. Talk about your upbringing in childhood. Are you from the Nashville area?
I am. I'm a rarity. I'm a born and raised Nashvilleian. I lived in South Florida for a little bit, but for the most part of my life, I've um, been in Tennessee, Nashville, Franklin area. As far as my upbringing, I would say my grandfather had as much to do as raising me, as my parents did as well. He lived literally in the same neighborhood. We could walk to his house. So I've been I was very, very close with my grandfather my whole life, basically. Um, yeah, we had a good upbringing. We grew up in Nolensville, fantastic place, and had a very awesome childhood. So
And your father is Joey as well. He was
yeah,
also a wrestler. What was it like
yeah.
having him as a dad?
Well, yeah, and rest in peace to both of them.
Mm-hmm.
My father passed away when I was 20, so 2003, 20 years ago. And he was a great father. I mean, a lot of people don't know this about Joe, about my dad. They saw he was a big guy, kind of rough, talk like this, had inch long hair all over his whole body. He looked like the missing link almost. But and he was the most deep thoughted thinking individual I've ever known in my life. Just a super intelligent man. And it's like a lot of people wouldn't know that based on kind of his rough exterior, the way he talked, ex-pro wrestler. But the guy, he was a great father. Very eccentric. He was a record collector. They had a record store
Mm-hmm.
on the side of my grandfather's health food store for 20 years. And so he was kind of eccentric in that type. But yeah, I couldn't say enough really about him or my grandfather, to be honest. Both great men in their own right.
And you, like you said, you went over to Len's house a lot growing up. And the both of them were just caring individuals, really family oriented, and just
Yeah.
loved being around so many people. Just getting to briefly, I got to be friends with your grandfather, and
Yes.
I used to go to his health food store over in Brentwood all the time. Like we would talk about the good old days with him wrestling Jackie Fargo and teaming with Bearcat Brown. And I also helped create the Facebook page for
Yeah.
Len Rossi, and it's still up and running if people want to check that out. But he had so many stories he was telling me about his days in the ring. Uh, it was very different back then. It's not like how it is today, this billion-dollar business. You had like so many people almost like jump ship from city to city, town to town, and territories were like, it was like the Wild West because you had so many people like leave and come in, and it was cycling
Yeah.
around. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, and back then too, I would say the southeastern market was probably the most popular. I mean, that's where guys would come to make a name for themselves. I mean, my grandfather moved from Utica, New York, and I'll kind of share a little story
Sure.
with you.
Yeah.
This is kind of an interesting story that. So when my grandfather moved down here from New York to be a wrestler, he the Poffos, who is Macho Man
Yeah.
was Randy Poffo.
And Lanny
His
as
dad
well.
was Lanny Poffo. So my grandfather told me this story, and I think I don't think he ever really fibbed to me much about stuff like this, but he said that when Lanny was trying to make a name for himself, he called my grandfather up and he was kind of telling him like, hey, I don't know, it's just not hitting off for me up here. I need to come down there. I need to come get in that circuit. But he didn't have any money. He was kind of broke, And my grandfather said, "Well, why don't you come live with us?" And he stayed with my grandfather, him and Randy, for like a few months until my grandfather could help put him on, loan them a couple $100 at the time, which was quite a bit of money at the time. And him and my dad, Joe, and Macho Man were running around the front yard 5, 6 years old together at my grandfather's house. And I always thought that was an awesome story that, he helped Lanny, and that's how the guys were back then. They helped each other out when they needed it, and they were very. From what I understand, back then they were really close. A lot of the wrestlers were really close. They spent all this time together on the road. I mean, they weren't driving around in buses and planes like they are now. They were riding around in vans and cars together, going to 4 different cities in a day. I mean, think my grandfather had said that I can't remember how many miles he estimated he logged. And he said he wrestled over 10,000 matches in his career.
I mean, that's
That's insane.
chaotic. It is. I mean,
Like
that takes it takes a toll on your body for that long if you're going from town to town in your car up and back. I mean, the miles,
yeah.
it's ridiculous.
And another real quick thing on that
Yeah.
too is my dad, just another cool story, that you're probably not going to hear anywhere else. But
It's an
my
exclusive.
dad, when Andre the Giant first came over, first came to the States, um, he wrestled a lot in NWA and in the Southeast. And he was on the road with my dad for 3 or 4 months when he first came over here. So my dad literally rode in a van with Andre the Giant, various other wrestlers, to all these different venues. And he said one time they went to this all you can eat buffet, and they Andre apparently took out a whole island of food, and the manager was so upset that they said if he came back he would have to pay for the food that he ate. And he said Andre would literally, they would go to the bar after matches, he would drink a pitcher of their beer to a glass of their beer. But he said that Andre was a prince of a guy, like he was just the nicest guy, but said he could barely speak English when he first came over too. So it was always kind of hard to communicate with him, but pretty cool story.
Yeah, I mean, he was by all accounts a gentle giant. I mean,
Right.
that guy was an attraction for the business. Later became a movie star. It's just incredible to see where the humble beginnings for such an iconic figure like Andre started out in the territories, working with guys like Len, who's he's been all over the world, all over the U.S. and he wrestled in Japan. I remember hearing some stories about the Japanese wrestling back in the day. It was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, it was crazy. And like he went overseas and wrestled in Japan. And my dad's passport, I have all his passports. He's got 3 or 4 of them, and they're just
Really?
chock full of, yeah, all types of places. And, you know, my dad wasn't as big of a name as my grandfather because he was always kind of in his shadow a bit. But, you know, he did make a name for himself too. But my grandfather, you know, at the time, I'd say before my grandfather's car accident that really ended his actual in the ring wrestling
Mm-hmm.
career, I would say probably from, you know, 1967, 68 to 74, you know, he was a household name in the Southeast. I mean, probably Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee. I mean, he would tell me they couldn't even go out to eat without being hounded. It's like they were superstars, you know?
Like
And you got to
celebrities.
think, right. And you got to think back in that time too, Stanley, that they only had so many channels on TV. You know, they might have had 3 or 4 that were working and, you know, other than at the middle of the night. But on Saturdays, people watched wrestling. That's what they did, you know, and guys like Jackie Fargo, my grandfather, Tojo Yamamoto, all those guys were on TV every Saturday, and they were stars, you know, they were stars um in their time.
My dad has often told me stories about seeing Len in the Hippodrome many years ago, which was like
Right,
an old arena, which is
right.
now the Holiday Inn over in Nashville. But he remembered a time when Len used to come out wearing a mask. They did like a loser leaves town deal, I believe, where like if you lost a match, you'd have to leave the
Yeah.
territory, but you could come back as a masked superstar. So he remembers seeing Len like wrestle
Right.
under a mask.
Yep.
They used to do that
Yeah.
deal, and then
That's that's a great story.
yeah, and man, like several of those guys wrestled at the old fairgrounds arena in
Hmm.
Nashville too. Joe, did was he trained by Len, your dad?
He learned a lot from Lynn. I mean, I don't know if he was, you know, hand to hand trained by him, but he did learn a lot from my grandfather, obviously. I mean, that's why he got into the business, you know. And the thing is, too, uh, you know, my grandfather and my father worked together for years. They wrestled together. They were one of the first ever father son tag team, you know, tag teams in the sport at the time for a while. I mean, um, they were one of the few. And, you know, they worked in the health food store their whole lives together. Um, and they were always around each other. And them both being Italian and kind of hot headed at times, like they butted heads a lot. You know, my dad was always kind of more of a heel in a way in wrestling. And you know, my grandfather they didn't really see eye to eye on both on their wrestling tactics, like my grandfather on my dad's, like in the way he did things sometimes in the ring. But my dad knew what he was doing, and he knew what he was doing for himself and his career. And honestly, my dad made a living at it. You know what I mean? He made decent money, even not having maybe the draw that my grandfather had, but he still made a living and helped support his
Yeah,
family. And he wrestled up until I was 6 or 7 years old. You know, um, I wish I wish if I had a time machine, one of the things that I would do is go back and see my grandfather wrestle. You know, like there's unfortunately we would have had a lot of video of Lynn, and I'm sure you've heard this story as well.
hmm,
But he had a house fire in like 1970, and it made the front page of the Tennessean. We got it somewhere, but he had a house fire, and all the old reel to reel tapes were in the basement, and it all burnt up, you know. And So we don't have much video. There's a video on YouTube of him wrestling, like a black and white, but it was before he even got big. Like that was back in Chicago in like 1960 or something.
Yeah, late 50s,
It's still
early
a cool
60s.
video.
It
Yeah,
is. It is a cool video. I've seen it several times. Len was a very what you'd call a technical wrestler. Very focused on
he
like picking
was.
apart moves, isolating them, really trying to pick apart certain body parts to slow down his opponent, and was just really
Right.
good at his craft. You know, I remember him telling a story that he was doing amateur wrestling at the old YMCA in New York before he was asked to
Yep.
turn pro. And making that transition was not easy for someone like Len Rossi. He was able to learn the skills and techniques in order for him to become the star that he became in the territories. I mean, he was unbelievable.
Right. And it's cool, you know. I mean, there's a lot of guys too that my grandfather was associated with, like, Rocky Johnson and a lot of, Vince McMahon Sr. He wrestled for him some. And there's all these guys that, that kind of were part of my era, all those guys that were in WWE and stuff like that in the 90s when I was really in the late 90s when I was really into wrestling as a kid and stuff. Um, that he knew them or he knew their parents or he knew, and
Yeah,
it's a cool thing.
I mean, just a who's who of people that wrestled in Memphis and Nashville. I'm talking about Hulk
Yes.
Hogan, The Rock, Stone Cold Steve
Yep.
Austin. I mean, The Undertaker. I mean,
Yep.
that's a pretty big list right there of guys that came through the territories and made a name for themselves in the South before making it big on primetime national television.
Yep. If it wasn't for Memphis TV wrestling, I don't know if the WWF would be, or WWE, I should say, would be the format that it is today, or at least that it became, especially in the really good years, in the kind of stone cold years and prior to that too. But I think Memphis TV wrestling kind of gave them the format of we want to make it like a soap opera. We want to, you know, um, basically make people believe that this is real, that this is what we're doing, and I think it's a cool thing. And I just got done watching that wrestlers documentary on Netflix,
Mm-hmm.
the series. I thought
Yeah.
it was fantastic. What Al Snow is doing there, and I thought my grandfather would love that show. I really do. Um, you know, he now he would have loved it and not loved it because Lynn was kind of that old school mentality. Like he didn't talk about the business. Like he would never talk about like, hey, this move was supposed to be this, or we were supposed to do this, or talk about that four-letter word that starts with an F and ends with an E would never enter his vocabulary, and they would never give. I don't even like saying it just because he never liked it, but he would never give out any information like that. And now we've gotten to a point in wrestling where it's kind of gotten to the point where it's just accepted. Everybody knows it. But at the same time, like, I still love wrestling, man. Like, I don't watch it like I used to. I've actually been watching OVW on their YouTube a lot, and I thought about going to a show up there. And
Yeah.
it's only 4 hours from Nashville. So I've thought about just going, and it's like, even though I'm not as big into wrestling per se, like watching it every week like I used to, my YouTube recommended is still filled with WWE clips and OVW wrestling. And it's just in my blood, man. I love it. I love going to see wrestling, even if it's small time wrestling. Like, I just love it. And I always feel like my grandfather being the pedigree of wrestler that he was, the technically sound wrestler, the guy who put all his heart into it. I almost feel like I can kind of see when these guys are really working or not, or really, selling their character and really giving it their all, and in a way, I kind of wish I would have took on wrestling, but my grandfather and my father never really pushed it on us. I think
Hmm.
they didn't want us getting into the business, because it's a tough business. It's tough
It
to
is.
make a living at if you're not, especially nowadays, right? I mean, so
It's hard because it takes a lot on your body. You got to put it through a lot of discipline and training. But you said you watched it a lot growing up as a kid. Who were like some of your favorites?
I mean, I started watching it probably right after, I would say, not really. It was kind of end of like Hulk's reign, but I would say Stone Cold Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, that kind of era. If it was WCW, like Sting, but I was more of a WWF when it was WWF then. But Shawn Michaels when Triple H was getting big, but I love Stone Cold. That was the one that really did it for me, like where I became kind of like a super fan of wrestling. And when, me and my neighbor, Kenny Mitchell, we would go and sit outside of the arena, 5 hours before the tickets went on sale and stuff like that, and it was cool. It was cool. And my sister got into wrestling a little bit too.
Yeah.
She she wrestled a little bit and kind of managed and put on a few shows, and she was trying to do it for a little while, and she was talented at it. And even now, like, there's some guys up there that I kind of like that I've been kind of keeping an eye on, so I still kind of tune in every now and then.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see that your family's legacy is still, you know, th- thriving in this day and time. With
Right.
your sister getting involved, you still being a fan, wanting to attend shows. I know your grandfather, he retired from in-ring competition in the early 70s when he had that accident you had talked about a little bit earlier. What was it that really got him into starting up his health food business?
Well, when he got into the accident, shortly after the accident, he contracted diverticulitis, and it almost killed him. And he was going to the hospital, going to all these doctors, and trying to get medicines and all that type of stuff, and none of it was working, and he almost died. You know what I mean? And he started getting into like Chinese medicine and herbs and things like that, and basically healed himself from it. And it was almost to him like a spiritual moment in his life where he had kind of this aha moment, and I've heard him say it's kind of like he was kind of reborn again by finding this type of lifestyle, and learning about these natural medicines that could heal people and stuff like that. And you know little by little he started studying. He got his doctorate in, what do you call it, he was a naturopathic doctor is what he was,
Yeah.
and licensed nutrition, all that type of stuff. And um he had the first ever health food vitamin store in Middle Tennessee. At one time, he had three stores. My grandmother ran one, he ran one, and my aunt ran one, and then my dad got in later. But eventually, by time it kind of whittled down, because you had the GNCs and the vitamin shops, and Walmart started selling vitamins, and Kroger and gas stations even started selling some vitamins. So the little mom and pops took a hit, and he ran it up until the very end, really, up until about 2 years before he died. He had a store, and they had widened the road in Brentwood and kind of forced him out. And at that time, he had got dementia, and was just kind of going going down a little bit at that point. I mean, he wasn't mentally there to be able to run the store like he used to. And I think honestly, and I think that's what really brought him down because he loved that stores, Stanley, and um, he talked a lot about just to throw that in there. He really thought very highly of you too. I mean,
Thank you.
it always baffled his mind for a young guy like you to be as interested as you were, and to show him the love and doing the Facebook, man, it means a lot to me, him and our family. So
Thank you.
I do want to thank you for that. It does
Oh,
mean a lot, and for real.
yeah.
But he just, I don't know, it just got to the point where he couldn't do it anymore. And I was in Florida, and my brother overseas, and my sister was doing her own thing. So it just something we couldn't really carry on. But it's a cool legacy, and he helped so many people throughout. A lot of people don't know that about Len. Like, a lot of people know him as a wrestler. I still have people come up to me, like, I tell people who are 50 years or plus, if they were from Tennessee, if I tell them, like, oh, you ever heard of Len Rossi? They're like, oh God, even to this day. I mean, that's how popular these guys were. People still remember. It's just a cool legacy, and it's cool how people still remember it. And you carrying it on like that is cool. Somebody's not even related to him or anything. That's a cool thing. And anything that we can do to kind of keep his name, and he helped so many people with the vitamins. I've seen him give away hundreds of dollars of products. I've seen him help so many cancer patients, giving them ridiculous percentages off, where he wasn't even making anything. For him, it was really about helping people. Like, it wasn't about the money. It really wasn't. It was just about helping people. I mean, he helped a lot of wrestlers too throughout the years as well.
Yeah, he definitely had a good heart. Definitely was somebody that showed a lot of compassion and empathy for others. And you could really see it in his face. Every time, like, I'd walk in his store, he'd have a big smile on his face. He'd give me a hug. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
I remember the first time I went to go see him, I met him. He put me in a headlock, and I got a picture with
I
him.
remember that. I remember that picture. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. You were young. You were really young then.
I know. I had to have been like straight out of high school when that happened.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
he was just a very happy person to be around. And I remember seeing the dog come in, Pepper.
yeah,
Yeah, Pepper would always come by there.
yeah.
You'd have so many people just walk in, and everybody would come up to him,
Right,
and you just would be so happy to see somebody like that. It would make your day, whenever you'd go to
right.
his store.
One thing that he was, in the kind of switch gears a little bit, one thing that he was really proud of, and not to be prideful, or not, he didn't look at it as a prideful thing, but he was proud of it. And one of the cool legacies of my grandfather's wrestling career was him and Bearcat Brown,
Okay.
and them being the first ever interracial tag team in the South, and really helping to integrate the sport of wrestling. And they sold out the Birmingham arena. It was like, the number changed every time he told me, but it was, 40 weekends in a row, 30, 70 weekends in a row. Apparently at the time it was a record, and they were turning people away. I mean, and there were times where when they would wrestle, Bearcat would paint himself white and my grandfather would paint himself black. And they would come out just to rile up people, and people would be trying to break in the locker room and stuff. Because back then, you're talking about Birmingham, Alabama, in the hotbed of
Yeah.
segregation, and the race riots. And that's just something he was always really proud of. And he was great friends with Bearcat. Rest in peace to Bearcat too. And his name was Matt Jewell, his real name, um, but just such a cool thing. And I know there was another wrestler from Memphis who had a lot to do with helping out with that too. I can't remember his name. He was on that Memphis Heat documentary. Um,
Yeah.
he was pretty big in Memphis too.
It was Sputnik
I would,
Monroe.
Sputnik, yeah, Sputnik
Sputnik
Monroe.
Monroe.
He was another guy who helped, you know, who helped in that as well. So just a cool little thing there, you know.
Yeah, if you haven't seen Memphis Heat, it's a pretty amazing documentary chronicling the
Fantastic.
history of Memphis wrestling. I actually went to a screening of it here in Nashville, and Len was a guest speaker at the end of the
Yeah.
documentary where they had like a couple people just on stage and fans were asking questions, and he was there. Just unbelievable, like the turnout of people that came to that event.
Yeah, he really loved it. And you know, that day, Stanley, I always remember that day because his dog Pepper, the little dog Pepper died
Mhm.
that day because I had to take him to get put down that day because he was really old and really sick. And I'll never forget it. He loved that animal. I mean, he loved that dog. And I had to take him myself. He couldn't take him. He was too distraught over it. And he didn't want to go to the screening. I was like, Pop, you got to go. Like, you know, it'll lift you. And it really lifted his spirits. I mean, there was like 50 people there getting autographs. And it was cool how they honored those guys in that film. And that was a great film. That really was one of the better documentaries I've ever seen. So,
And that will really kind of help get my interest in the territories, seeing that
yeah.
documentary. Because, like I said earlier, my dad went to go to the matches at the Hippodrome and at the fairgrounds. And I started like looking at old clips. I actually got to hear your dad on commentary back in the day.
Oh,
He was
wow.
commentating on some matches. He was a pretty good
Yeah,
announcer.
he was there, and there is a lot of footage of him doing that. And he was good at it, you know. And I think Nick Gulas was just trying to keep him in any way he could. I mean, you know, he was my grandfather was a big draw for him for a while, you know. But a lot of the boys back then they hated Nick, so he was a very hated type of guy back then. I mean, he kind of it's a shame because a lot of the guys, you know, they starve. I mean, he starved them out. You know, I mean, he wouldn't pay them hardly anything back then, and you wouldn't really get paid good from Nick unless you were like a top draw, like Jackie or Lynn or you know, somebody like that. So, but you know, that kind of they showed that in the Heat, the Memphis
Yeah.
Heat, where kind of he faded out and what's his name came in,
Jerry
the
Jarrett.
Jerry Jarrett came in, kind of did his thing, and you know, so on. History is written.
Yeah. Well, Len definitely helped a lot of people with the health food stores we discussed, and Joey, your dad as well. He came in later to run the business, and I think the both of them were working together for quite a while, running the store.
Yeah, yeah, they were, and like I said, my dad had the record shop over to the side, and he loved music. I think that's where I got into music. My
Yeah,
brother and my sister got into doing music and writing music and all that type of stuff. You know, I think I got a lot of my charisma from my grandfather, and you know, a lot of my kind of thinking from my dad. So,
yeah,
um,
it's like a
you know,
blend of everybody, which is important.
right.
Let's talk about the final days that Len was with us. Do you remember where you were when you had heard
I
about?
do. So I was in Florida. I was living down there. I had been up about 2 months before to see him, and you know, he was getting to the point with his dementia where he was kind of, you know, forgetting a lot of stuff, and it wasn't full on Alzheimer's or anything, but he was just getting to the point where my grandmother couldn't really take care of him anymore. And um you know, I got the call. I was at work in Florida, and he had passed away in his favorite chair. So apparently he kind of went out with no pain. You know, 2 weeks before he had passed away, they had found out he had cancer. And
Oh,
and yeah, I mean, it was just like boom, like, and it was right after, the right kind of during the pandemic, really.
Yeah, it was the thick of
So
things. Yeah.
yeah, so it was, it was
Thick
tough.
of it.
It was tough getting that news. But we had a great funeral for him, and a lot of guys showed up and stuff, and a lot of people, and they sent him off right, and I'm just glad that he wasn't in a whole lot of pain when he went out, and I mean, the man was 92. He lived an incredible life. He got to do some things that most people would dream of doing, and he made a name for himself. He did good financially. He was always he was always pretty good, of course nobody's perfect in life, but he always did his best to to be kind to people, to help others, to help us. I mean, the man was there for me. I went through some hard times with addiction in the past, and he was there for me through thick and thin. And I always tell people that knew him as a wrestler, yes, he was a fantastic wrestler, but he was an even better grandfather. So, luckily I kind of um, I've been sober for over 5 years now, and he got to see me get sober, and he was super proud of me. So that was a really cool thing for us both to get the experience, because that's all he ever wanted for me, was to kind of rise up out of that. And he did a lot to help with that. I mean, he was never the type of guy, and I want to say this on here if anybody ever watches this about Len, he was the most least judgmental guy. You know what I mean? Like, he knew what I was going through with addiction, and that man never judged me. He never talked down to me. He never acted like I was a leper or something, like, it was always just, the conversations were like, you got to beat this thing. You got to get some help. You got to do this. What can I do to help you? And he did. He helped me tremendously. He helped me make the decision to get clean, and help me financially at times when I was going through all that. So, you know, I could officially say that, I have so much respect for that dude. I mean, it's just through, I don't think I respect anybody more in this world than my grandfather. So um I'm just glad he got to experience, the good times in my adult life before he had passed, and before he got dementia too. So
Yeah, you had an amazing experience with him, as well as your father Joey, and
yep.
the Rossies are just loving people, kind people, want to help others, and you're, like you had mentioned earlier, you got the traits of both members of your family, all sides of your family. You've got the charisma. You're a musician and you're a songwriter, singer songwriter.
Yeah.
Want to touch on that a little bit? That's awesome.
Yeah, so I had a band a few years ago. I have an album online that we made. It's Rossi is the band name. And I have a YouTube network that I'm a part of. Me and a guy started. We have the biggest non-media credentialed YouTube in town, with about 12,000 subscribers. And and I go by Titans Rossi, and I use Rossi a lot. Our real last name is Rossitano, but I use Rossi in homage to my grandfather and my dad. But yeah, music's been a huge thing in my life. I write music, I sing, um, it's, I work in the treatment industry. So, I work for a facility where I basically I find people treatment for mental health, drugs, and alcohol. I've been doing that for a few years, and I'll go play music at our center there in Brentwood, and for the clients. And I use my music now for more of that type of thing, but I still go to the local dive bar here in Franklin
Yeah.
and play the Riders Nights every now and then. And um, like there's a place called Kimbro's in Franklin,
Hmm.
Tennessee, in the square. And we had a thing for my grandfather there a few years ago where we, put all the memorabilia on the walls, and
Yep.
my band did a show. And um, so, any chance I get to talk about Len or Joey, I do, so
Yeah, I mean, you're paying it forward with not only telling us your stories about the struggles, but with your music, it's a very healing thing that you're able to use a
yeah.
vehicle like that and spread the word to other people that may need it. And it's just nothing like a good song in your heart, and it's just very soothing.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Yeah, it's just something that I love to do, and giving back. And like I said, a lot of that came from Lynn, and a lot of those traits from him. And it's a cool thing. And I know Papa, we called him Papa. He'd be looking down now and be proud of us, all of us kids, my sister, my brother, and everybody. And there's a song that he wrote, that he co-wrote, that they used to play at the wrestlers reunions.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Um, and what's his name? The guy who produced it, I want to say Jimmy Hart was a part of that too,
Yeah.
and of helping produce it or something.
Yeah.
But he goes through all the guys that who died, who passed
Hmm.
on. And every
Yeah.
year at the Cauliflower Alley reunion in Mobile, they would they would get in a circle and they would play the song, but they would add the recent names to it. And now Lynn's name is to it, and the great wrestling ring honor in the sky. So
Yeah.
one of the best to ever do it. And I hope there's guys out there um, who have a lot of stories about him, wrestlers and stuff. And they I hope some of these newer guys and stuff, they do look back on the old guys, and they do look at the history of it, and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's always important to have that legacy around and really know the people that came before you so that you can kind of get some ideas and implement that in their work, and the cycle continues. And that's very important to
Right.
have some of that old school um around influences.
Yeah. And do you still watch current wrestling?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan. That's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, was because I wanted to do something for the wrestling community,
Right.
create a positive outlet. And there's really not a lot of shows where we talk about this kind of stuff. So this is kind of
Yeah.
something I wanted to do, really. And when I thought about people that, you know, made an positive influence on my life, when you talk about wrestlers, Len was one of them. And I wanted to do a
Yeah.
show uh, specifically dedicated to him, and to be able to talk with you is just a true blessing. And I just want to say thank you, Michael, for coming on here. It means a lot to me and to the listeners and viewers. We've just got enough content to make a part two, so you're more than welcome to come back.
Yeah, definitely, man. I feel like we could probably just, chop it up for for hours or whatever. It's cool that the involvement that you had in Lynn's life too. And like I said, that's something that we're really grateful for. And I always thought like I said, it always blew his mind. This young kid, he's so into it. He knows everything about the history. And I'm like, yeah, it does. It blew my mind too. And it's cool, it's cool that you found like this thing that you really enjoy, your passion. I'm the same way, like with creating content for the Titans and the community. we really do a good job of getting the community involved in our podcast and all. That's what it's really about. It's more about the community, and having a place where fans can talk about whatever they want when it comes to the Titans and stuff. And um, it's a cool thing. So, you know, we'll have to talk after the show at some point, and I'd love to, like I said, help you out with your thing, and
Yeah,
get together on stuff. And if you ever want to do this again, let me know. Maybe
yeah,
next time we could get my brother and my sister
yeah.
um
Let's do it.
on with us, and kind of have a big, just them tell stories, and we all have our own little stories, so
Yeah, we'll definitely do that again. Absolutely. Thank you
yeah,
again, Michael.
of course.
All right. This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.